True North, and I thought what better way to celebrate it than bringing Candace Malcolm herself back on the Andrew Lawton Show. It's good to talk to you, and welcome back.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Andrew. It's great to be here. And I just have to say that I've enjoyed True North's coverage while I've been away of the Andrew Lawton Show so much. Literally, that's the way that I would stay in touch with what was going on in the outside world. I would get my news exclusively from True North, and I really think you guys have done a great job in my absence, so thank you for that.
Well, I'm very glad, and obviously, we were in touch over that time, and I think we chatted at the Albany Club, whenever that was, and everyone was so happy to see you back. But let me just first ask you, how blissful has it been to not have CBC as part of your news diet? Because on one hand, I'm like flattered, okay, yeah, she's paying attention to my show, but on the other hand, it's like I hear people that get their news only from legacy media sources, and I can't imagine their mental health is all that good.
Yeah, I was definitely one of those people for many years, Andrew, but I sort of took a unique opportunity, I guess, during my maternity leave. I decided to basically unplug from social media, from the sort of digital landscape that we are so attached to. And I mean, it's a little ironic that I am the founder and the owner of this company that is a digital media platform, and so much of the way that we reach Canadians is through these new non-traditional distribution channels like social media. But for me personally, it was almost just like a mental health break. Like I got off of Twitter, off of Facebook, off of Instagram. I deleted all those apps from my phone, and the only way that I was really getting news was through email. So I subscribed to a few different newsletters, True North being obviously my favorite, but also just a really good source. And I think definitely for me during that time, like spending time with my kids, spending time face to face with them, not always being on a device, grabbing my phone. Most of the time, I didn't even have my phone like on the same floor of the house with me, and it was really nice. It was kind of a good reset, and it was almost hard for me to get back into it. Like I just finally started downloading these apps back onto my phone and kind of getting sucked back into the doom scrolling that sometimes happens when you're on Twitter or X for too long. You just have to remember to turn it off. I still think it's important, like on weekends, like Sundays, I put my phone away and give my attention entirely to my kids, my family. And so just to answer your question, like not having CBC, obviously that was great. I mean, I didn't have to listen to the propaganda. I didn't have the rising blood pressure that happens when you have to, subject yourself to the misinformation, to use their term, or just a stream of media narrative that they try to ram down your throat. That was a nice break. I encourage all of your watchers and all of your listeners to just tune out of the legacy media, because the more you pay attention to them, really, the more frustrated you will be.
When you mentioned the Twitter X thing, I was just imagining you trying to reinstall Twitter and not being able to find it. You're like looking on your phone. Where is this? What the hell is this X thing? Where did this come from? I know that you were like living in a cave or anything like that, but I will ask you on that, because if we talk about the way media has changed, it used to be that news was an active thing that you had to go out of your way to consume. You picked up the newspaper, you read it, you closed the newspaper, that was done. You turned on the TV at 6 o'clock or 11 o'clock, and it was done. And you are right in that social media has led to a barrage of news throughout the day. And I'm a news junkie, so for me, I've never viewed that as a negative. But it does change the relationship people have with news. This is now something that is kind of endured, or that you can be bombarded with. It's not something that you just can have a sort of a set part of the day that you deal with it.
Yeah, and I think it's a negative part of our culture. I think that's part of the reason why none of us can really get along anymore. And we were all like at each other's throats, especially if you think about during COVID, when we just people just didn't see eye to eye or didn't agree with the facts coming out. It's like, you used to your point, you get the newspaper and that was the news of the day. And then you wouldn't get more news until maybe that evening or the next day. And, the introduction of cable news, they called it the 24-hour news cycle, because there had to be new news, every hour to keep the airways filled. Well, now with social media, it's like every second there's something new. And, it can really suck you into this thing that political news is all that matters in the world. It's all that matters in your life, and you define yourself in those terms. And it makes it harder to relate to people, and you have people in your family, people in your friend group, people in your community that might not share the exact same political views as you. It makes it more divisive. So I think we would be better served as a society, generally speaking, to take a step back from that. Yes, be aware, be informed, know what's happening in your community and your society. Definitely hold the government to account. That's what we do at True North. Don't let politics dictate every moment of your life. Like, enjoy the real things that matter: your family, your friends, your relationship. Go outside into nature and appreciate the great outdoors. We don't have to be hunched over our laptops or over our phones all the time. I think I think really having that human connection is so much more important than the digital world. And social media is great, and it's really helped us, especially us in the news business, and it helps so many people connect. You think of friends from high school, university that you're able to just really easily keep in touch with because of social media apps. But obviously, there's also the negative side to that, which is that technology can be very addictive. It can be very isolating. It can make you feel very lonely and very detached from the real world and being human. And so it's just important to be aware of that and to make sure that you're not allowing yourself to be sucked into the addiction of technology.
To go to the news industry side for a moment, the conventional wisdom is that news is in decline, media is dying, and I think in a lot of ways there's reason to think that. You see mass layoffs from some of these big players like Bell Media and Post Media, but it's not the full picture because independent media outlets are growing. I don't know if maybe I'm revealing too much, but I don't really care. Just yesterday, you and I were chatting with some of our colleagues, and you just said, let's put up a job posting for X. I won't tell people what the job posting was yet. And that's, I think, an example of where obviously we have to be scrappy and we have to deal with a much smaller budget than our counterparts in the legacy media do. But we are hiring, we're not firing, and they are not experiencing that. So I don't think it's fair to say that media is in decline. I think it's fair to say that the landscape is shifting. But I'll ask you why you think, and maybe it's content, maybe it's business, maybe it's the business model or something else entirely, but why is that happening? Why is independent media able to grow when legacy media is not and has had to rely on bailouts just to even maintain?
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely a good comparison, and it's fair. I mean, if you think about it, the very reason that they had to go hat in hand to the Trudeau government is because their business model is stale and they haven't adapted to the new digital landscape and the new digital world. The newspapers and all of these subscription-based platforms really required a captive audience and a monopoly in terms of advertising. We just don't see that anymore. It's way more efficient to advertise on Facebook or on Google. You'll actually reach the very specific demographic in the very specific area that you're looking for, as opposed to putting an ad in a newspaper. So I think that True North has been able to not go by that sort of we don't rely on advertising at all for our business. And I also think that there's something that has gone fundamentally corrupt within the legacy media, whether they realize it or not. They are biased. They are beholden to the Trudeau government. And I think perhaps their worst crime, Andrew, is that they're boring. It's so much of the sameness. It's so much repetitiveness. They have very limited way of looking at the world, and the way that they present the world, it's very static. It's very inauthentic. Whereas, when it comes to True North, you get podcasts. You get something a little bit more real, a little bit more relaxed. You have people talking about politics, but they can also talk about culture and community and family and other things that interest them. And so I think that this platform is just more consumable. It's more natural. It's more relatable to so much of the audience, which is why we do have that audience. It's not just because we're offering the other side of the story, which we do, telling stories that aren't being told. We do. But I think that the new platform and these new independent media companies like True North just offer a more entertaining, more interesting platform. And so much of the legacy media is just really stuck in this old dated model. And unfortunately for them, they're not. Fortunately for True North, we've found great success. We've found an audience. We're continuing to grow. We've been pretty conservative in our growth because we didn't want to go out and spend tons of money, not to have something sustainable. But we are in a position now where we are growing. We're doing big things. We have exciting things on the horizon for 2024 and beyond. I'm really excited about it. I actually think it's a great industry. It's a great time to be in the industry because it's changing, and if you're able to, adapt and continue to search for that audience, I think you can be rewarded as we are here at True North.
I feel bad because I always love hearing feedback from people. We were at True North Nation, which was an event you were at and I was at that True North hosted in Calgary, and we had I think 450 people out from our audience, which was fantastic. And one guy came up and said, "Have you considered starting a newspaper?" And I thought he was joking, and he wasn't. And I felt bad about that because I think I may have chuckled instinctively. But no, I think that, really the answer is no. Is that the reason that a lot of these companies, as you say, are having such a difficult time adapting is because they are so reliant on things that are very costly, that have very high overhead. I mean, I look at Sun News Network, which is a great example. You and I mean, you had more of a role there than I did. I just appeared every now and then on some of the shows. But this was, I think, spending $20 million a year and had a fraction of the audience that True North has cultivated with a fraction of the budget that Sun News had. And look, it only lasted a couple of years before that was just unsustainable.
Yeah, it's a very sad story. I worked at Sun News Network in Toronto, and let me tell you, Andrew, it was such an impressive outfit. Like you walked into the studios, and it was incredibly sophisticated, modern. Like the amount of equipment that they had, the studios were beautiful, huge staff, big newsroom. It was really fun to work there. But I think you're right. They sort of put the cart before the horse, so to speak, and they really built this really modern, incredible, expensive apparatus. And unfortunately, they just didn't get the right regulations. Things didn't go their way. They didn't get the mandatory carriage on Canadian news. You have to keep in mind that the Canadian news business is very controlled, very government controlled, and they didn't do that part correctly. As far as the audience, it's hard to tell. It's really hard to tell how many people are watching TV in any channel. I think that a lot of those numbers are really over exaggerated when it comes to how many people are watching CNN, given that anytime you walk through an airport, every single TV has CNN on there, same with CBC in Canada. So I think that the numbers that they believe they're getting are quite exaggerated. But look, I spent the beginning part of the interview talking about how social media can be addictive and it's good to get off of it. But at the same time, that's how True North reaches its audience. That's how we have been able to build this really incredible media company. And it is because of these channels like YouTube, X, Facebook, Instagram. Unfortunately, the last two, we've basically been blocked from having access to thanks to the True government's regulations and laws. Hopefully that will change and we'll get back onto those audience. But it just shows you again how important it is to continue to adapt. For us at True North, we can't rely on that Facebook audience. So Facebook audience used to be our biggest audience. It isn't anymore, and we've had to look to other places, other social media outlets, because we can't rely on that one because you never know what the Trudeau government's going to do. You never know if that social media company is going to just start banning your opinion because they don't like it, as we did see during COVID. So again, it's a fun, interesting business because you have to kind of constantly adapt, constantly be changing, constantly making sure that you're remaining diversified and remaining able to the audience that you have cultivated.
Just for people, let's go back to the basics here because you shared at True North Nation the origin story of True North, which I sort of have heard a few times now, just because I was there not at the beginning but not long after it. And I know you've shared it elsewhere, but there's this new wave of audience that we get every, well, I'd say several times a year, but certainly at points such as the election, the Freedom Convoy, COVID, bring in new people that haven't been there since the start. And I think like those laborers in the vineyard parable in the Bible welcome you all regardless of when you started. But how did True North shift from what was originally envisioned as a think tank and very narrowly focused on immigration into this independent media powerhouse?
Yeah, no, it's a great question and it's a great point that we need to explain the origin story because not everyone was there from the beginning. Many people were, and we appreciate those people that have supported us from the beginning. But yeah, like my own background, Andrew, prior to getting into media being a journalist, I had more of an academic background. I worked at think tanks in Vancouver, in Washington, D.C., and I wanted to do something sort of more academic, writing papers, writing policy papers, focused on immigration, telling the other side of the immigration story, which is just the need to make sure that people integrate and that they embrace Canada, and talking about immigration security and some of the threats that happen there. Anyway, I started doing that, but then I also had a column in the Toronto Sun and been a long time columnist writer over there. And what I found was that through my research would lead to me writing news reports. And every time I would write a news report that would get into the Toronto Sun, my audience, the people who supported True North in those early days, really wanted more of that. They were like, these white papers are fine, but nobody reads them, and they're not really having an influence because Justin Trudeau's a prime minister, he's not reading them. So, why don't you do more of the research, more of the investigative stories, more breaking news stories about immigration? And that was the part that just sort of had interest, and no one else was really doing it. And so we pivoted. We said, okay, let's focus more on telling news stories, doing investigative journalism to do with immigration, to do with terrorism, to do with border security. And at some point, it was like, this is just too narrow as well. Why are we only talking about one issue when there's all this other stuff happening in Canada? And Andrew, as a journalist, as soon as you start telling stories and start researching in one area, you just start getting so many tips and so many leads and so many people pointing in different directions. Really, I couldn't do it by myself, so I started bringing on other journalists. And now, we focus on anything and everything in Canadian politics and Canadian culture and beyond. I think Andrew, you gained yourself a very big following by going to Davos and exposing the World Economic Forum. So, it's not just limited to Canada, although obviously we're all Canadian and that is our focus. But I think just even that origin story of how we pivoted, how we went from just focusing on research to wanting to do journalism, it shows something that I think every business owner knows to be true, which is that you can't be too firm in your position. You have to be amenable to changing, to pivoting, to focusing on something new, depending on what the audience wants and where you're finding success. And so that's basically what we did.
How do you define the editorial position? Because one of the challenges is that people in our space tend to get typecast by our critics, and every now and then the Huffington Post or whatever will slip in like a far right, and if you call them on it, they scurry away and change it because they know that they really can't defend it. But for people that what is True North in that sense?
Well, I think that sort of old dynamic of left versus right that doesn't really always apply. I mean, if you look at even just COVID and the vaccines, like people who were in favor of it versus people who opposed it, it didn't really fall on left, right, conservative, liberal views. So I think that there is a lot of sort of changing landscape when it comes to just political ideology in general. But I think as far as what we do at True North, from the perspective of our news, we are independent. I think that we just look to tell the other side of the story, look to tell stories that aren't being told. There's no agenda, there's no persuasion. It's just let's tell the stories of Canadians. Let's tell them in a fair and accurate way. Let's try to be unique and entertaining, yes, but let's tell the news. And so I think our news division, we try to be just neutral and straight down the middle. As far as our podcasts, I would say that we would probably tend to be more center-right, conservative, critical certainly of things like wokeism, critical race theory, Trudeau liberals, a lot of the sort of gender stuff that they push in. We tend to be very opposed to radical Islam and terrorism. And so those things, I think, certainly in Canada, would put us more on the center right. But, it's really interesting. But because of our coverage, for instance, during COVID, when we were just really telling stories of people who got fired from their job because they didn't want to get the COVID vaccine, or people who were skeptical for their own reasons, the audience that we're reaching really wasn't the center right. It was just Canadians. And we brought a lot of people on board. I think a lot of people who would have never thought of themselves as conservative, but for instance supported the Freedom Rally and supported the truckers, all of a sudden they were smeared as far right. They started to realize wow, Candace Malcolm and Andrew Lawton are smeared as far right, but they're obviously not. So maybe they're getting smeared as far right. I have friends right now who are Jewish, who are pro-Israel, view themselves as liberal, but all of a sudden they're asking, why is it only the conservative and right-wing media that is talking about this issue of these sort of crazy pro-Hamas rallies in Canada? And it kind of makes them question the entire media narrative. And they say, well, why does it take right-wing media to expose this? Maybe you're not right-wing after all. Maybe I shouldn't have believed what legacy media has said about you all these years. And, I think everyone has their own moment when they wake up to realize that things that legacy media say aren't necessarily true. And I think that so much of what legacy media has said about our organization over the years, it really doesn't hold up to much scrutiny.
Yeah, and I would also add to that, and it's a distinction I've made elsewhere, that there's a difference between being right-wing media and media that is of interest to people on the right. And by that, what I mean is that you can have an approach where you cover things that matter to a subset of the population without pandering to them and without being especially biased. And one of the things that I've absolutely loved doing with True North is covering leadership races within the Conservative Party. We've had two in the time that I've been at True North, one in 2020 and another in 2022. What? And in both of these, True North really stood out for asking questions of leadership candidates that mattered. Whereas whenever any of these went on CBC, for starters, they're not speaking to the people that actually make the decisions in those races, which are Conservative Party members, but they're speaking about issues that don't even matter to people. They're asking questions about climate change and abortion and systemic racism, whereas people want to know how are you going to deal with Quebec, and what's your view on supply management, and how are you going to keep caucus together, and are you going to have a free vote? I think that's probably a real distinction of we add value. And it's not that we're being uncritical. I think, oftentimes we have partial that matters to a population that really seems to be forgotten or denigrated by the legacy.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I think Ramaswamy, running for Republican leader in the States, made a similar point the other night. Why are we doing these Republican debates, with the legacy media, with the hate us? I think that in Canada, a large part of the population, a large portion of Canadians just get written off by the legacy media. They don't understand them, they don't like them, they don't care about them. When you see the legacy media attacking Pierre Poilievre, when you see the legacy media overtly attack.
Fucking A.
Whitney and Asher Siegel, and this is Flip Lane Brigade.
Got it.
This is American.
Literally like an entire hour of me just fucking with technology.
Welcome to another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast here from the Stoughton Delicatessen Restaurant. I'm Aaron Randall, along with Leslie Chesterman and Bill Brownstein, and our special guest today, Benoit Dubreuil. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
For those who don't know, it's maybe a face you haven't seen a whole lot. Benoit Dubreuil is now the first ever commissioner of the French language in the province of Quebec. So when I say the first ever, my first question, Benoit, maybe this is not fair. We have a minister of the French language. We have an Office Québécois de la langue française. Why do we need a commissioner of the French language?
Very good question. So the situation we had prior to Bill 96 was that we had an additional organization that was called the Conseil supérieur de la langue française that had existed since 1977. And that was basically providing advice to the government, advice to the minister concerning big questions about the evolution of language. So what Bill 96 has done is abolish this council and kind of replace it by this new position of the French language commissioner that instead of reporting to the minister, will report directly to the National Assembly. So the organization is about the same size. Part of the mandate is the same, but it has more teeth to actually have a control function and monitoring function over what the government is doing.
So when you say monitoring and
Yeah.
then reporting to the National Assembly as a whole, what exactly are you monitoring? I mean, what makes that up? What are you checking? What are you looking for? And what will you be reporting on?
Yeah, that very good question. Like the Act sets out a number of things that I need to look at, including what parliamentary institutions are doing. A lot of it also is about the learning and use of French language by people who join our society. Part of it is the programs and obligations of the Office Québécois de la langue française, of the Ministère de la langue française, just to make sure that they are doing their work properly, that they are implementing their duty correctly in function of the charter. So those are the very specific things, but at the same time, it gives some kind of broad power to basically look at pretty much any aspect of the evolution of the linguistic situation in Quebec and provide recommendations to either the government or the National Assembly. So it's both very specific and very broad, and that's part of the challenge, I think.
Okay.
Immigration is something that you've spoken up about in the past. You've written about that you think that too much immigration here could have a negative impact on French. Is that? Could you elaborate?
Yeah. So immigration obviously is not the only question that is interesting when we talk about French. Obviously, it is a bit the topic of the hour because it took a lot of place in recent debate, recent election campaign. So maybe to summarize my view about this is that like we are starting, if we go back, like let's go back to the 50s and 60s where we had the situation where vast majority of immigrants were opting for English, were very attracted to English. There was this kind of segmentation in society between Francophones and Anglophones, who were bosses and workers. Then came the Charter of French Language and somehow like very significantly changed the situation with children of immigrants, but with immigrants also themselves. And we entered a situation like in the 80s, in the 90s, where immigrants were much more likely to opt for French, but not necessarily at the level that we find in the rest of society. I think since the early 2000s, there has been a bit of a shift also, mainly related to changing the composition of immigration. That's where we start seeing a lot of people coming from North Africa, for instance, who tend to opt French very, very often. And this also kind of helped closing the gap between immigrants and the rest of society. And like if we look at the last census data, there has been a further decline, like maybe 10%, but I think it will probably be temporary and we are likely to go back to where we were like between 2001 and 2015. And then there are further changes that are proposed by the government on immigration policy. And one of my responsibility will be to look at how it will affect the propension of immigrants to opt for either French or English or both.
So I know that in your first report, you talked about something that is obviously an issue when we ever discuss this, which is the language you're speaking at home. And a lot of people, the attitude is, wait a sec, the government has no business in my home to find out, number one, or tell me what I can or can't see at home.
Yeah.
What you mentioned is you brought this up in the report. Why is this a concern?
Yeah.
Yes! Yeah!
Holy shit. Yeah, you're going straight to Burning Leaf, eh?
Yes!
Okay, if you get back before I do, I left the key in the inside mailbox.
Okay,
Okay?
okay.
Do you know when you're going?
I'll let you know.
Okay.
Bye.
Yeah, well, I think when you look at the history of immigration, not only in Quebec but in North America, you see like a process that is very well established, where immigrants, first generation, they tend to adopt, like vast majority of them, the dominant language in public, right? So it's English everywhere in North America, French and English here. And then second generation, they tend to adopt and to bring these language at home, and third generation, it becomes the first language of children. So I'm not very worried. Like if we maintain the presence of French in public, I'm not very worried that in the long run things will end up balancing out, even if people at home speak another language. And the other point I think that you're raising is also right. I mean, when we're developing language policy, there are limitations to what we can do, right? Because at some point people do have right to intimacy, do have right to preserve their private sphere. It doesn't mean that we should not be interested in people's behavior and that we cannot study it, and we should not be getting a full picture of what is going on. But obviously when we talk of action, there are limitations to what we can do that would respect people's private sphere.
I'm beginning to wonder, or at least I think Anglos, by virtue of what we hear, are beginning to wonder whether there really are limitations, how far a government, I realize you're not part of the government, but how far a government could or would go in restricting that access. We know now in June 1st, in Bill 96, suddenly if you want to receive or continue to receive government services in English, you need a good faith attestation as an Anglo, or you can be Indigenous or live out of the province. That just seems like one step. And I know the government has said, well, you know what, we'll let this go for a year. And if we have to adjust, we will. But just the fact that that's now introduced is a reason for concern for Anglos. So I'm wondering, are there limitations? You said there are, in terms of what a government can do to protect or promote French?
Yeah, I mean, I think your question has two components. One of them is like, what would be the right end situation that we would try to achieve in terms of the overall balance between French and English? And the second one is like, in terms of individual freedoms, are there actually boundaries to what the government can do, right? So in the first case, I think there is some form of balanced situation that we should be looking at. It's true that when you look at history, what happened is that like in the 80s and the 90s, French achieved to make progress, okay, and even to maintain its place, and even in the early 2000s, even if it was not like attracting as many immigrants that would have been needed. And the answer, you know why? It's because a lot of Anglophones were leaving, right? So that's also part of the picture. When we look at the overall balance, I think what we would like to have in terms of the situation is one in which young Anglophones were not massively leaving the province, or Anglophones are not massively leaving the province, and at the same time where immigrants who are coming in basically opt for French and English in proportions that are similar to what you have in the rest of society. So for me, that would be the type of balanced situation that I would like to see. I don't think we are exactly there. The other question is in terms of limitation to private life, and that's a tough question because there's whole jurisprudence that exists in terms of individual rights. It says that like if you end up applying a constraint, then it needs to be reasonable and it needs to be proportionate to the objective that you're trying to achieve. So that's typically what courts are looking when and lawyers are looking when they think of these issues. Like does it make sense in terms of what you're trying to achieve, and is it proportionate, like the limitations that you're imposing, is it proportionate to the goal that you will achieve?
The Corner Booth podcast is brought to you in part by the Snowden Deli, serving Montrealers since 1946 and home of the city's best smoked meat sandwich, the Snowden Deli, DeCarry Boulevard, north of Queen Mary Road.
The interesting thing to me is, having lived here all my life, having grown up here, the cultural climate has so totally changed. Whereas I agree that back in the old days, the stereotype of the blue-haired like woman at Eaton's who only served in English, that's changed. Like my kids, all the kids, they went to school in French. They all work in French, and they live here. And I think I know there's this. We all want to protect the French language. I don't know an Anglo who doesn't, but those of us who have stayed, and I think on a level, there was a study that came out and said like that 90% of people in Montreal, like Anglos, are able to carry on conversations in French as well as in English. And I think that's changed dramatically from the bad old years when, there was a real schism, there was a real divide. And I think people are sometimes puzzled, Anglos, because they think they're being viewed as the enemy when they are trying to make an effort to fit. I mean, to the point where, perhaps not at home with like two Anglos talking to themselves in bed. I mean, that's one thing, but I think there's been a real shift. I don't know if you see that.
Obviously, like I think the 90% is the overall population in Montreal who are able to have a conversation in French. No, obviously, I mean it's always a matter of what's the baseline with which we're comparing. Like if you compare to the situation before, there has been a dramatic shift in both the attitude and the skills of Anglophones' capacity to use French, in fact, of actually using it in everyday life. And the overall Anglo population, like in terms of first language, and even like it is not growing, right? So I think the question is really what choices will people who join our society will make. And the thing is also that there is a significant proportion of immigrants who arrive. And I mean, we have in Quebec like two public language, French and English, that are official language in something like 100 countries, right, around the world. So a lot of people who arrive here already have like prior exposure to one language or the other. And a lot of them already actually speak it and already use it as vehicular. So obviously create a situation where people arrive, they're put in front of a choice. Some of them know very well French, know virtually no English. Other people know very good English, no French, and other people are very fluent in both. And it creates a situation where there's competition. There's not a competition everywhere. There are things that you need to do in French in Quebec, or like mostly do in French. There are other things that you mostly have to do in English, but you have all those other circumstances in between where you basically have the choice. And the preference of the people who arrive to join society actually changes the mix over time. But I fully recognize what you're saying. I mean, there has been a dramatic shift. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, no,
There's an aspect that I...
No, but what's very interesting is that also the Anglos stayed here. I mean, we could have gone to Toronto, got jobs else. We stay here because we love it here. We do love living here. I mean, for all the issues that we have, and it's not just language, it's going ahead, but we love it here. And yet, I think we always have to persuade people that we are at home here. Like my family arrived here in the late 1800s. It's always been the home. Those who left because they didn't feel comfortable. I'm not comfortable. I couldn't live in Saskatchewan. I couldn't live in Ontario. I mean, this is home.
Yeah, no, I understand. Maybe one thing that I could add also is that when we compare the situation to what we had like several decades ago, is that the situation in many ways is much less polarized. Like you do have people on the English-speaking sides who are more typical of the old Anglos, and on the French-speaking side you also have the equivalent. But you really have a big mass of people in between that are really on the continuum, and I think that has changed in many ways. And one of my surprises since I've been appointed is the number of people with whom I speak, and I just realized that they have no preconceived ideas at home about these language debate, which is kind of surprising for us who grew up like in a situation where those debates were much more tense. But when we look at the younger generation, they just don't have any preconceived ideas. They really look at this from a fresh new eye. Typically they are bilingual or they aspire to become bilingual, and they're open to having discussions about how we could arrange things in a way that would be fair for everyone. So this also give me hope. I don't think we need to.
I have a question regarding exactly that, because I have 2 kids, and when I asked them about that, they said that for them, the issues that we had as young Anglophones in Montreal of everybody beating each other up don't exist anymore, and that it's really, that has changed dramatically. However, what is your take on bilingualism? Because there's a lot of pushback about bilingualism, especially for French kids to learn English, because I think all of us who have young kids in Quebec want them to learn French. My kids went to French school, but I find that there is a huge pushback from the Francophone, especially the Legault government, about encouraging young Quebecers to learn English. And secondly, which is really, I think, the biggest challenge you have, is how are you going to make it interesting or attractive for young people to not go to the American culture, to not be influenced by the English culture, because that's what they're doing. I have 2 young kids. They're always on YouTube. They're not listening to anything in French, and there are a lot of French Canadian kids who are not listening to anything in French either.
And
your
I
media
would add that
sucks.
this might not be only a challenge for
What? Yeah, well, no, that's
perspective.
most French people
Because
I
a lot
know
of Francophones today I see are
only
turning
watch
to English
English
based
media
24 hours
because
on YouTube,
French
and
media is
that's really a
crappy.
big change from what
And
I saw
English
in
media
the
is better.
generation in which I
Like,
grew up. Like, it was not
That's
possible.
not like
right?
everyone
It
has
did not
things that they're
exist.
good at and
So
things that
now
they're not
there's
as
a
good
big
at.
shift. But one of the things that is
English
worrying
people are good at
for me
making
is
media.
that these people
Like
are not
music and
necessarily reading
movies.
the Gazette, are not necessarily listening to Montreal Now.
Even
So-
Canadian, they're not.
No,
America is the biggest
So,
threat.
I mean, for Quebec now, I think there is a bit, like, I speak to a lot of parents, French-speaking parents today, and we are all very much surprised by the consumer habit of our kids. And it's not only English. Also, my kids, for instance, it's a lot of content coming from France. And I love content coming from France. I
Yeah,
love
but
French people.
They
But at
hate
the
you
same time,
guys.
I mean,
It's
you
not our
still
culture.
need to
They
be
don't
aware of
like
what is
you.
going on in your neighborhood, right? But I think this is pretty interesting, and also help us maybe go beyond some of the debates we had traditionally, because at the end of the day, I mean,
It's not gonna happen
I
because
also
you get
have
all the
friends
same
in
people who
my
are causing
life
this
that
problem in the
chose
first place,
to
like
go elsewhere.
50 years
I
ago,
decided to
out
be here,
of
so
that
we all
job.
decided to be here.
Right.
So
Like-
at some point we have institutions, we have a life in common. So the question of culture is about
Yeah,
language, but it's also about, like, do we actually want to share something, or we just want to be exposed to content coming from the four corners of the world and
But
not knowing what is
But
going
you know,
on.
But is that part of your job to try to make French
That's,
more appealing to young people? Because to me,
Yeah,
I hate to say it, but
Yeah.
I'm a huge Francophile. We speak French and English at home.
yeah,
I think you're fighting a bit of a losing battle. I'm sorry, but I think that is a massive challenge,
yeah.
and I think it's a shame.
Yeah, and I think something really changed, and it's not since a long time, right? It's really with the invention of the smartphones and platforms, and like during 10 years, it's like things change from one thing to the other. So I'm not sure what's the answer to that, but I think debates about the role of platforms in our life, the role of GAFAM in our life, how they structure the public debate, how they influence democracy. I think at some point it can be a discussion about language, but at some point it will also lead to a discussion about these broader issues, which are increasingly top of the agenda.
So let me take this to the next point to suggest further on what Leslie's bringing up. If the issue, we hear from the Premier all the time, that line about, the French language is in peril, and if you want to extend that, French culture is in peril. I'm starting to wonder if we get to the point, when we talk about limitations, where, a government will look at this and say, you know what, we've done what we can in terms of making the province as French as we possibly can, signage, speaking, etc. And just because we can't seem to get over that hump from the internet, from social media, now you'll no longer have access somehow to media from someplace other than here.
Yeah, well, I don't think there's a big risk.
I don't see that happening.
It's
Who knows?
It's happened other places.
Yeah, I think the bigger risk that we have is if we reach a point where all our information are controlled by GAFAM and by algorithms, that we do not have some governance culture at some point, and we've seen this in other countries, how it could bring people to move towards certain directions. I think that's probably the bigger challenge. But just forgot the first part of your.
No, I'm asking if that limitation could extend to the point where, a government
Drastic
no more
No.
US, no more English.
No, I don't think
It'd be
could.
very hard to enforce.
Yeah, exactly, because basically,
No
and
more
that's,
going to Florida.
yeah, that's the problem. I mean, we we like algorithms, right? We all like algorithms. They give us what we prefer. They create this
They tell
environment.
us what we prefer.
Yeah, francophones are very engaged on social media.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's a much broader issue.
I want to know too, to the point where this whole idea, Leslie brought up bilingualism.
Yes, bilingual.
If you take Montreal and factor every other part of the province out, it's not an issue anywhere other than Montreal. Right. That seems to be the concern. This is where big business is.
Yeah.
This is a big part of the financial part of the
Situation in Gatineau could raise
yes.
some issue. You have it's partly linked to housing in the place of the federal government. I think there's a discussion also that we should have about Gatineau, especially in recent years. That extend to the broader question of the language of work and the place of French in the federal public service, because that's an extension of this debate. But yes, you're right. I mean, it's pretty much about Montreal, because if you were outside of Montreal, it would be much harder not to use French in the public domain.
But to that point, a lot of Anglos see something called wedge politics, where the people that say the present government or others are appealing to are people who live outside of Montreal. In fact, most of the support for the current government comes from outside of Montreal. And they see this as basically an issue to, get their base fired up on a certain level, that there's a decline. And as they mentioned, the issue would be most in Montreal, where these people aren't. And you would think that if that was the case, that the government would be more popular in Montreal.
Yeah, I don't want to comment on electoral strategy of different parties, but I think everybody, including francophones in Montreal, do have the perspective and are interested in debate, francophones and anglophones. So I'm not sure it is. I think there is some linguistic divide in people's preferences, but yeah. So
it was also very interesting. The Grand Prix last weekend came. And I did a piece on the street speaking to American tourists, and I was happy to discover, or maybe even a little bit surprised, language was never an issue whatsoever.
Because they don't live here.
No. But I'm talking about in terms of getting services.
Getting service in English.
Getting service in English. Not one complained. I mean, and we have to understand that this is a tourist city. As London is, Paris is.
But on that note, sorry, we're taking over the conversation. On that note, that's a lot of reason that people come to Montreal, because it's francophone.
Exactly.
They say, I can't afford to go to Paris, let's go to Montreal.
And they love it,
better.
but yet they're speaking English, and they say they have no problem.
But that is a huge draw that we can't lose here too. Language is as much of a draw, but when they get here, maybe they want directions in. But back to the bilingual. You are beautifully bilingual. You're perfectly bilingual. Do you want your children to be bilingual?
Oh, I mean, I'm extremely surprised by how much bilingual they are, because I never paid any attention to teaching. Social media is. I mean, they're not mainly looking at things in English.
But you want them to be bilingual?
Obviously, everyone wants to be bilingual, and I mean,
Legault does not want to be
no, that's what I'm not doing.
But never really wanted.
But I think the thing with bilingualism is that, I mean, we need to be making the difference between what is good for the individual and what impact it has when you aggregate individual behavior. Because the issue with learning each other's language is that the more you learn the other person's language, the more you reduce the incentive of other people to learn your language. Right? And that's the problem that minority are facing. In Quebec, it's not too dramatic. French is a large language, influential, world language. Take, for instance, indigenous languages, right? They're in much more dramatic situations. So they're increasingly wanting to be bilingual, but becoming bilingual, what incentive people have who want to learn their, so that's really the trick with bilingualism. So people tend to see you want language policy, so it means that you don't want to have bilingualism. And that's not the case. The more bilingual we are, the more reflections we have.
But the thought process is that once kids start to learn English, it's the gateway to giving up on French.
Yeah, I think it depends. Traditionally, it has not been the case. I think now we are entering a new world that I don't understand fully, and I still need to understand what are the implications of it. Because and I saw this article in the Devoir a couple of weeks ago about kids in Nunavut, right, who were entering school speaking better English than Inuktitut.
Right.
And basically it's 3 or 4 hours of YouTube per day, and you end up not being able to speak your language properly. So I think we are entering a new world.
And English is easier than French, like it or not.
Oh, no.
I've done both. Oh,
No, I think
I still can't. Les phrases avec si.
Yeah.
Yeah.
no,
Proper French is difficult.
Roman languages are difficult for the verbal tenses, right? That's the challenge. But the challenge with English that people don't notice is the how do you call it, the tonal accent. That's hard. That's really hard for Francophone because in French
It's
it's
not as
always
hard as male and female for the French side.
yeah, but at the same time, it has no implication to be understood by people, right?
True.
Yeah.
So let me ask one thing. We're going to run out of time, and I want to just go to a point that I think maybe you could answer. I'm not sure. The premier has often said this is a recurring theme in this government. The French language is in peril.
Mm-hmm.
When you take over, when you have this job as commissioner of the French language, is that your starting point? Acknowledge that it is in peril and trying to find proof that it is, or where's the starting point?
Yeah. So for me, the challenge is really, the French is declining with respect to a number of indicators, and it has implication, right? It is growing according to the overall number of people who can speak French and can use French, but it is also declining, for instance, in the public sphere. I think in the workplace, the last census has given data that are source of concern. The challenge for me is to manage to describe the glass, which is half full, half empty, in a way that makes sense for everyone and helps creating some common ground for the discussion to be rational. Help kind of channel the discussion on basic understanding of the facts. But
yet at the same time, we pointed out that Bill brought up that figure of 90% of people are able to carry on a conversation in French. So you have that on one side, and the idea that French is in peril on the other side.
So basically, you have like different levels. Like you have people who speak French at home, people who use French in the public sphere, and people who know French, right? So I think just looking at the number of people who know French is probably not enough for me, right? Because you can be in a situation like I worked in Ottawa for many years, and I was in a countless meeting where 90% of the people around the table could speak very good French, and 98% of the meeting was in English.
Right.
So you can have this number of people or the proportion of people who know the language is not a perfect indicator of how good you will be in the position you will be actually using it, right? You can be in a situation where a large proportion of people know it, but you won't be able to use it. So that's why we need to look at how it is used, how people preferences also evolve, and how all this interact to keep some form of balance in a situation that is overall fair, right? That I think that's the overall objective. It's not.
And do you have a firm number in terms of when to this level I'm satisfied that I've solved the problem?
The problem we have is that historically, I think I mentioned it earlier, but it's the fact that there's interprovincial migration also that kind of complexifies the issue. The fact that people who were speaking English or immigrants that were opting for English had a propension to leave the province more, and this kind of helped keeping French at a higher level. So when we talk about immigration, I have this figure that I would like I think I mentioned 85%. It's probably a good guess, right? 85 for French, 15 for English. That would be probably the right number just for immigration. But then there's the question of interprovincial migration, and there's the other question that you mentioned: what happens within non-immigrants, right? Because the views are also changing, and it raises questions that are totally different. The way we want to structure our social life, our relationships with media, and all that. So these questions are interconnected.
It's very interesting that, I don't know if you saw, you must have seen this, when you were appointed, we had an op-ed.
I'm going to make a bold statement and say that doing a TEDx talk is going to be the most transformative and uplifting experience of your life and your business. This is the year before TEDx talk when I had a
Welcome to another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast here from the landmark Snowden Deli restaurant. I'm Aaron Rand, along with Bill Brownstein of Gazette, Leslie Chesterman, and our special guest today, Marla Risky. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And before we begin, in case you're wondering, so this is our new fundraising T-shirt for the year. It's I Love Quebec because we all love Quebec. Hashtag, if you can see that part, notwithstanding. So for all the politics we have to live through here, it's still a great place. So if you want to get the shirt, by the way, and I know we'll be talking more about this in the Gazette on the weekend, you go to historicanglos.com, you can buy it. And our shirt supports this year Moisson Montréal, which of course is so important now to have so many Montrealers, and the Gazette Christmas Fund. Historicanglos.com if you want to find out more, you can order directly from there. All right. Marla Risky, Liberal lemonade for Saint Laurent, but more importantly, the next leader of the, oh no, getting to that later. Sorry. Liberal education critic, and education has been very much front and center for the last few weeks now. So let's start first of all with the tuition hike that Bill Premier has decided he would like to put into place, because he says it will help financially. And I think many of us, and having talked about this before, realize it's more about language than it is about finance. So where do you stand? Where do the Liberal Party stand on this provincially?
Right, the first day when they announced on October 13 that they want to raise the tuition fees to $17,000, I was actually with you on CGD and with Greg, my husband, and the Liberal Party for us, it's a big no, and I will have to explain why. Mrs. Derry, she's the Minister of the Higher Education. It's funny because as a tax law professor from the University of Sherbrooke, I'm expecting that any Minister of Higher Education, when you open your mouth saying something, that you have to back it up with data. And we asked her, do you have any? And she said, no, like, do you know what's the average of other programs outside of Quebec? It's roughly about 17,000. So, as you probably know me, I did my little Excel sheet, and the average is about $9,000. But guess what? You have to take my word. This week, what I did, I brought at the National Assembly the report from the financial minister, Éric Girard. Back-to-back years, he wrote on public report that the average tuition fees for Canadian outside of Quebec is the same average of other provinces. He wrote in black and white. So I'm like, okay, so even Éric Girard knows it's a big line saying the average is $17,000, and right now the average that we're asking Canadians, it's $9,000. It reflects actually the same average of any other program in other province. So this is why we're asking Mrs. Derry to stop it. She needs to find some common sense, because what she's doing right now is attacking institutions. McGill, Concordia, and in the case of Bishop, it's a devastating news. It will definitely close Bishop. They won't survive. 30% of their students are coming from outside Quebec.
Right. No, it's incredible. The same Monsieur Girard, by the way, who before all of this went out and said that it's no good that Toronto is becoming richer than Montreal's, but much better economy than Montreal. We have to do something to pump up Montreal. So this is really going to do a lot to pump up Montreal. And not only that, I mean, it's all a canard, of course, this whole business about language being, there's no data about the French language being threatened on the streets by foreign students.
No.
Yeah.
I have to say, there's 32,000 students coming from outside Quebec, and we had last year 11 million tourists visiting Montreal. Right. Should we tell them not to come over?
Well, that's the message you have to speak English, right? But what kind of message is that sending to tourists at the same time? Don't come here.
Well, on Monday, protest. I saw like some sign of people saying, well, maybe you should cancel the Grand Prix of Montreal. Like, there's like two more things in Montreal. So
it can't be like we both win a little bit and a little bit. No.
But
it has
I
to
have
be
to
only
say,
we win.
what you're saying about
And nobody else wins.
that was on September 27th with Corinne.
Right.
And he said in French that, this is the first time that University of Toronto is doing better than McGill.
Yes.
We should do something. But that was before the by-election of Jean Talon. And when they lost that by-election, Mr. Legault actually decided that, I have to do something.
Right.
I'm losing grounds. He has 89 MNA, 89. And now he said...
He's paranoid.
I think like he just lost right now all common sense. And he was, what exactly? Because at the end of the day, all the universities are asking $1.4 billion. He didn't put any more money, and he knows. He's He's a CPA apparently. But he should know that no one's going to come in Quebec paying $17,000 when they can stay in their home province paying about $5,000 to $9,000 in the program.
And the irony is, of course, that half these people come, they want to embrace the French culture. This is why they're coming here. Otherwise, they would stay in Toronto or Vancouver or wherever.
Have the Acadians who have no program in their province coming here in Quebec, and they need us.
Right.
And I gave actually an interview on Monday for them because this is devastating news for them. It's like we're no longer welcome here. I met Sophia. She's the president of the Student Union of Bishop. She's from Alberta. She came here. She didn't speak a word of French. Nothing. Now she's perfectly fluent.
This has actually come up a lot on social media this week. A lot of people I have a lot of restaurant people on my social media feed. A lot of people saying, I came here, I went to McGill. I now own Olive and Gomondo. I now own all these people who came here, who love it here, who stayed here. But also the people who come here, if all of this is passed, what's the feeling that there is a place for them here? I mean, even if they come and study in McGill with higher fees and everything, what is the feeling for them of why they should stay here if they don't already feel...
They're being made to feel unwelcome already.
Absolutely.
So,
And yet we celebrate our restaurant culture here without fully understanding where it emanates.
so we should point out as well, you've posted a petition online, and it's, go ahead and explain because it seems to be gaining some steam.
So yes, so with the student unions, and I have to say, this petition is not only supported by the English student from Bishop, Concordia, and McGill, it's also supported by Union Québécoise, Union Nationale du Québec. They represent 94,000 students. Most of them are Francophone. So right now, after only 6 days, we have over 6,000 people who signed the petition. And we hope to raise like at least 20,000 more because we want absolutely the government of Mr. Legault, they have to back down. They need to understand that you cannot attack the knowledge because at the end of the day, what they're doing is not only attacking the English institution, it's attacking the knowledge.
You're right.
Well, that's the point, right? Because the Premier said, the excuse, if you will, the condition, French universities are underfunded compared to English universities. The money that they would save by not having to spend on English, they would put into the French system. That math doesn't make sense, does it?
No, two things on that. First, it's funny because the chart that they use saying that the French university are underfunding, they put le réseau UQ, so UQAM, UQAR, and Bishop in the same. So I'm like, oh, it's funny, huh? So Bishop is also underfunding under your own chart. So that's one thing. But the second thing, they said they're gonna save $100 million from McGill, Concord, and Bishop if the students from outside Quebec are coming, paying $17,000. I'm betting whatever you want, they won't come at $17,000. At the end of the day, they are missing $1.4 billion for the university. Even if they were right, which I argue they are not right, they're still missing $1.3 billion every single year.
Right.
And so far, he didn't announce anything.
Right, and the math is that how short-sighted it is. These students not coming here, if they choose not to, will take $400 or $500 million out of the economy because they spend when they're here. They buy, they invest, they whatever. So the math it seems completely flawed.
Absolutely, and the data that we have is only from 2019. At that time, roughly it was about $520 million spending by Canadian students here in Quebec. My bet is today it's even more. So, and in tax, because as a tax lawyer, I have to talk about the taxes. Just for taxes, it's $52 million. That was the data from 2019.
But it also will be an advantage to kids who can pay that kind of money and a huge disadvantage to anybody who, so it's advantage for more wealthy kids.
Elite.
For the elite. And that is so unfair because anybody, and also McGill's a very hard school to get into. We're just talking about McGill right now. So, there's a standard that's very high, but kids who won't, the standard will be not only that you get in, but that you can cover these crazy fees. So it's such a disadvantage of what we consider education in Quebec that it should be fair for all, and it's not.
And there's one more thing that people didn't talk much about it. There was Paul Journet from La Presse. He wrote it in French, and that would be like the first time that we're gonna break what we call the reciprocity.
Right.
Every Quebecer student, they're going outside, studying, in UBC, Alberta, or Ontario, they're paying about the same fees, except for Ontario, they're paying about $200 more. There's some exception for the medical program and the law program, but the audit program is about the same price, except for Ontario, $200 more. And now we're gonna double the fees in Quebec. I don't think they realize what they're doing.
Oh, maybe they
because
do.
Maybe the other provinces at some point they're gonna say,
Of
hold
course.
on a second.
Yeah.
If you're charging our student more, maybe we should.
Chargers.
And we have to keep in mind they said that we're taking so many students from Ontario. So I went to check the numbers. We have every year about 6,400 students from Quebec going in Ontario studying, and we just have the same amount coming from Ontario studying here in Quebec. So, like my mom says in French, it's kif kif.
But logic notwithstanding, he'll never backtrack though.
He says
He's
gonna
up against the wall.
talk to
Yeah, he's going to
bishops,
talk.
right?
No. Yesterday, the premier said he's meeting the university.
Yeah,
But this is the need.
right.
The premier is stepping in.
You're right.
So I think for Bishop, they have no choice.
Right.
But it's more than just Bishop. He has to understand that, yes, we can talk about how we can more finance the university, the Francophone, but we don't need to attack McGill and Bishop and Concordia to do so.
But his history is when he's backed up against the wall, he doesn't backtrack. He pushes forward.
No, not in my files. I can give you some examples.
Okay.
Nathaniel Catron, I remember at the time, 80% of Quebecers, they were all in for it. And Premier Legault said, this is like the best thing ever. I'm like, it is good.
Right.
The Liberal Party, we agree with that. But the problem is that we don't have any teachers right now, and we don't have any classroom. And it took about 4 years. And then they realized that, of course, we were lacking teachers in classroom. After that, for the troisième lien, he did back down. But after the by-election of Jean Talon, he said, oh my God, maybe we need the troisième lien again. But I think for this issue, with the number of people gathering against the idea to raise the tuition fees to $17,000, she will have to back down. And just on Tuesday in Bishop, they had 600 people gathering in support of Bishop. And there were not only Anglophone, there were a lot of Francophone talking on behalf of Bishop, supporting Bishop. Sébastien Housset, who's the president of the Chambers of Commerce of Sherbrooke, he says this is like very important. And another issue that came up was the sports issue. Bishop has over 300 athletes.
Yeah.
Half of them are coming from Western Canada.
McGill has the same thing.
So what's going to happen with this team?
They're talking about cutting down the sports programs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that would be devastating
that'd be
also for the Quebec students.
Right. And speaking of teachers,
Yes.
there's going to be a strike.
Yes.
Your plate is full with education.
It is. It's funny because the government had $7 billion when the Liberal Party left office, and today all the money is gone. Remember the checks of $500 that he gave like to almost everybody? Just that was $6.7 billion.
And he's thinking about maybe doing that again. He sort of hinted
We're
at
running out of money. And he also said that maybe we're going to have a deficit. And today, he has no more money for people who used to call his ange gardien during the pandemic. And they're very upset because they did do it. When we needed the most, they were there frontline, the educator in the CPA, the daycare, of course the nurses, but also the teachers.
But he's got $500 million for the Olympic Stadium roof.
He has, but he has also a lot of money for the battery, but we have to keep in mind the best battery that we have is education. And right now, we need to make sure that we can retain them. And the problem that we're facing, 25% of the graduate teacher, they leave their job within the first 5 years. Why? The answer is in the report of the Statistician Général du Québec. The General Audit of Quebec wrote in May that it can take about 7 years before you get a permanent job as a teacher. It doesn't make any sense, especially that in the National Convention, it says that you should be permanent within 2 years. But they give them part-time job. With the economy that we have, with the inflation that we have, who can afford to work part-time? No one. And last year we we lost 800 professionals. You can talk like language therapists, psychologists, what we need the most in education also. So they left for the private sector because they didn't have you cannot afford to pay your rent, to pay your groceries with part-time job.
The Corner Booth podcast is brought to you in part by the Snowden Delicatessen, where we are. 75 years in business, the home of Montreal's greatest smoked meat, plus carnotzel, potato latkes, and the famous Snowden Deli party sandwiches. That's the Snowden Delicatessen. All right, I want to transition from what we've covered here to the Provincial Liberal Party.
Yes.
Your role within the party. We've talked about this before. Most recent poll that came out, the Léger poll, that showed for the first time ever Paul St. Pierre Plamondon pulling ahead at François Legault. So we're starting to see a bit of a shift. I know the election's still 2 years away, but the Liberals continue to just 12, 13%. 15. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking of Eric Duhem. Yeah. But so the Liberal Party still mired down there. People are wondering what's going on. I know Marc Tanguay, who's the interim leader, has already said he doesn't want the job full time. Your name has come up more than once. You said for now, you're a new mom, you have a 1-year-old. You're not interested right now.
Nope.
But you've not shut the door.
No, because I have my baby number 2 on its way, maybe. No announcement today.
But we're history.
So yes, we want to have another kid. So that's why I cannot run for now.
But there's such a void.
I want to go back to for now.
Yeah, for now.
For now.
Yes.
Meaning in a year, in 6
No,
months,
I don't think. No, I don't think that can happen for 2026.
Not in time for the next provincial.
I don't know. That's
When your kids are older. And
yes, because I have like my little baby boy who just turned 1 year old, and it's a sacrifice going to Quebec, leaving my boy at home in Montreal.
Right.
I'm doing a lot of back and forth. Just last night, like I don't want to make anyone cry. I know I chose my life, I chose my position, but I came back at 11:30 p.m. at home, and I have to start my day like any other Quebecers early in the morning. But it's a joy to have my little boy with me. But with another baby, I just know that I will be overwhelmed having a newborn and a toddler, especially when he's going to turn 2. I know that's going to be a lot of trouble. So I just decided that for now, I'm just going to focus on my family, and we'll see after that if I can manage having young children in a caring partner.
So we can count on you in 3 years.
Yes.
I like that.
How about
But
15 years? 15 years?
My point is there is such a void right now. You need a leader there because there's time to move, to make a move. I mean, Monsieur Pratt and the group who came up with a very interesting set of desires and demands for what they wish, English rights being enshrined and all the rest. Now is the time to make a move, no, before you, like...
Timing is everything.
Yes.
And in my position right now...
But just for your party's position as well.
Is it in my party, my family comes first.
No, I understand, but I'm talking about it in the Liberal Party.
So the idea, for example, that they're not going to announce a
leader, yeah,
right,
is wrong. Yeah,
a lot of people are weighing in on that
yes,
and saying that's a mistake.
you need somebody who's a leadership position. If it's not you, then maybe your husband.
We need to get to know somebody. Yeah.
Oh, we'll ask Greg if he wants to run. But 2025 will give us the time to also make sure that people who has a job right now, that they don't want to announce themselves right away, can do the leadership race in 2024, become a leader in 2025, and still have like an entire year because during the 2024, and anyone who wants to be the leader of the party should have his platform ready. Like,
yes.
You cannot do a race without a platform. People are talking, we need someone with charisma. Of course, yes. But first and foremost, make sure that you have a platform that you can explain to people. And I think last election was hard for us during the campaign because people were not sure about where we stand on some issues. So we need someone who knows exactly where you stand for, with a platform, ready to go, with people that people can relate to also.
But you know what people will say, that's another year or a year and a half where the Liberal Party is just floating without anybody having an idea of what their platform is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those situations where it's getting to the point where people look at the Liberal Party provincially and say, there's no one?
Is there
One
no-
leader,
No, I'm sure we're gonna have a race.
But there's such a hole in the market right now. This is the time to step in. Like the way the way things have been polarized, the way they are. I think now is a great time for someone to jump in and like claim some territory.
So that's it. Bill was right. Who is that person? If there was somebody
Good question.
Right.
Very good
Apart from you.
Honestly, I don't know because no one actually announced officially themselves. So we need someone who's ready to work a lot of hours because we need to rebuild the writing association. We need to make sure that we have enough money to campaign. We need to make sure that the person can bring new faces because recruiting was also an issue. We have to be honest. Last election, we started the election, we didn't have all her candidates. So the person who's going to take that job must be fully aware that this is a great opportunity, but with a lot of work.
To rebuild the party.
Yes, absolutely.
But when
if you want to be Premier of Quebec, you know what? The best free job to do so is to become the leader of the Quebec Liberal Party.
Right.
Because if you can fix us, what happened with us, with the writing association, with the candidates we need, but after that, I'm pretty sure you can actually lead the Quebec.
But that poll of leaders at like Monsieur Tanguay was 9%. Like he drew the least number because he's interim. It's almost like a lame duck.
And we know he's not going to.
And we know he's not. So why would anybody like just jump out and support? He's lame duck almost.
But Mike is doing the job as an intern, which is a very hard one.
No, but the designation is bad because in terms of the perceptions of people, there's no leader. And I think that's so essential at a certain time.
But I will say something. If we don't have a race,
right,
it's even worse, in my opinion. We need to have debates. Last time we didn't have any debates, so people didn't have the chance also to hear new proposals, new ideas, nothing.
So let me ask that question then. It's hard to look into the future, obviously, but it's a lot easier to look into the past. So how did the Provincial Liberal Party get to this point? How did it fall off the cliff and end up where it is now? Why do you think that happened? Why did people give up on it?
I don't think people gave up on us. I think they were disappointed, and they wanted to have people who's gonna listen. Sometimes you can hear someone, but you don't listen to people. It's like the difference of the verb. So not only hearing, but listening to people, and then come with solution to real problem that we have. Sometimes I think we were like too, like in the abstract, and people could not relate to us. And sometimes we were like 2 days after like a news, we should be like more like proactive. And for the writing association, we used to have a lot more people engaged. And when you've been in office for 12 years and a half, you might have take people. No, take people maybe for granted that they're going to be there. But when people start leaving, no one actually raised the issue. And we had a report, it was signed by Jérôme Turcotte at the time, who said, oh my God, we do have a lot of members who didn't renew their cards. That was the first red flag, but no one listened at that time. That was the time to wake up. But when you're in power, you think, okay, maybe there's a change, people are not taking their cards anymore. But yes, people are still taking their cards.
And now, are you optimistic for the future?
Yes, I am, because we saw the numbers in different writing. I can think about Madouane Bourassa Sauvé. She has like over, about 2,000 members. Same thing for Sona and Sona Locayan and Chamonix, because we did the meeting. So they were not nominated. So they have a nomination meeting. So a lot of people actually were setting cards, new members, and they had like to debate to win actually their seat. And that's good, actually.
That's the city, that's local. We know the CAQ's never going to win more than a couple of seats in Montreal. What about the regions? That's where the party hurts the most. How do you change that?
First, Eastern Township. We have to go back to Eastern Township, and then we also will go back to the Outaouais. We always used to be very strong over there. We had a strong voice. It's time for us to go back. We did last week on Friday. We showed up at Bishop. Within 24-hour warning, we said to the principal of Bishop, we're coming. We're going to do a press conference. And there was a lot of people there, and the news coverage was very good. And we were the only party on the ground over there on that issue.
Okay.
But we have to do it all the time. We cannot take a break. So that's something that we need to make sure that on every issue that we show up, if we have an issue in Mauricie, show up in Mauricie. Forget about the National Assembly. I'm sorry, but it's not the 45 minutes of the question period that's going to help us. The 45 minutes of the question period is important, but it's not the way you can connect with people. You have to get out of the National Assembly, take your car, get there, find people, and you know what? The student that I met, I'm sure that some of them will be volunteers at the party. I'm pretty sure of that.
Another point is that Quebec Solidaire is slipping.
Yes.
And if there's never been a better time probably to fill that vacuum. So, don't you think?
Yes. For me, there's always a good time to go back there. But you need to be on top of your game all the time.
Right.
And you should not be afraid to speak out. You should not be afraid to be invited in the show. And there's like a lot of things that have been done. In the regions, Quebec Solidaire is not very high. And André Fortin did like, people are not hearing him because he's like more in the radio in the regions, talking about the forest and the agricultural world, but he has a good impact in there. But we have to do it more and more again, but we started that work.
Okay.
And I'm sure it's going to pay off at the end of the road.
Marwa, we want to thank you very much for coming, for
That's
being
it.
our guest today. We want to thank you as well.
Thank you.
That wraps up another edition of the Corner Booth podcast here at the Stone Deli. We'll see you again soon.
Ah!
Welcome to another edition of the Corner Booth podcast.
Now we're going to go to the second round, and it's a
You're
5-minute
so
round.
cute.
And we begin with Rachel Thomas again. for the
She looks
Conservative.
like Betty
5
White, or
minutes,
sounds like
please.
Betty White. You hear? Look,
Mr. I noticed that you answer my questions in French, but
Now we're going to go to the second round, and it's a 5-minute round. And
Sounds like
we
Betty
begin
White.
with Rachel Thomas again for the Conservatives. 5 minutes, please, Mrs. Thomas.
thank you. Minister, I noticed that you answer my questions in
It is
French, but
literally
other
full
English
blast.
questions you answer in English if they're from your Liberal colleagues. I realize it's completely your choice. We're a bilingual country, but if at all possible, I'd love to have it.
Rappel au règlement,
Point of
Madame la
order,
Présidente.
yeah.
Rappel au
That's
règlement,
not
Madame la
appropriate.
Présidente.
What did he say?
Shouting.
Minister, I noticed that you answer my questions in French, but other English questions you answer in English if they're from your Liberal colleagues.
Oh,
I realize it's completely your
Let them
choice. We're a bilingual country, but if at all possible, I'd love to have it.
Rappel au règlement,
Point of
Madame la
order,
Présidente.
yeah.
Rappel au
That's
règlement,
not
Madame la
appropriate.
Présidente.
again.
English questions you answer in English if they're from your Liberal colleagues. I realize it's completely your bilingual country, but if at all
Yes,
possible,
Jack.
I'd love to have it.
Rappel au règlement,
Point of
Madame la
order,
Présidente.
yeah.
Rappel au
That's
règlement,
not
Madame la
appropriate.
Présidente.
Shouting. There are at least 5 people shouting for a point of order. And Claude, did you see who was the first one? Okay, I think it was Martin. Go ahead, Martin.
Madame la Présidente, j'ai pas besoin de vous rappeler, de rappeler à ma collègue
Wow.
que nos invités, comme les membres de ce comité, peuvent s'exprimer dans la langue officielle de leur
Yeah,
choix.
and
Nous avons un
everybody does
service
it in
d'interprétation
bilingual,
extrêmement
asshole.
efficace. J'ai l'occasion de le vivre
They
régulièrement.
follow up
Alors,
and they
je pense que
switch
le
the
ministre
they switch
a tout à fait le
languages.
droit de répondre dans la langue de son choix. C'est insultant pour les Québécois, présentement, ce que j'entendais pour les francophones. Merci.
You're fucking garbage.
Sorry, I think Lisa was before you, Peter.
J'avais le même appel de.
So no, you can't really fucking say the bad things in English.
Lui demande de parler.
Even though I'm obligated to stay tuned in French. So that works. Good job.
Peter?
Madame la Présidente, je viens sur le même point, rappel au règlement. Je viens de poser 2 questions en anglais.
Yeah.
Et le ministre a le droit de répondre dans la langue de son choix. Et,
So they're going to start pulling this
question,
kind of card now. That means, I think, the English conservatives
tout le monde.
in the rest of the country that have been very like, yeah, for sure, support French language that's like disappearing.
Thank you. There was a valid point of order. Yes, Mrs. Thomas.
Most of these people.
No,
and now Quebec is like, we want all of Canada to be French.
Okay,
thank you.
And it's just kind of like, you know what? But this is that whole thing where it's like you get caught doing something you're not like that you knew you weren't supposed to, and then you double down, and then fucking continue to push your fucking shit narrative, even though someone literally just told you in public, being like,
Point of order,
no, you're
Madam
fucking
Chair.
not
Madam Chair.
Point of order.
And not
have to
socially
go back to
acceptable
the
in our
original
society.
point in the point of order, and that is that the person speaking should choose what language they wish to speak in.
Wow.
And if the minister chooses French, fine. If she chooses English, fine. We cannot make her answer in whatever. Okay, good. Minister,
Okay, what about fucking
continue.
Chinese?
You want
What
to
about
ask her a
Spanish?
question?
If I just start
Yes,
going into Parliament
Michelle.
and speaking in
Michael?
Spanish.
I think that the fact that the Conservative Party has demanded that a member speak only in English,
Yeah, but they refuse to speak English.
to me is
And
it goes
I'm
against
expected
everything
to
this
ask
country
questions
has
in
been
French
built
and
on.
English. Why aren't you expected to just fucking ask questions in
when
French
we
and
come into
English?
this chamber, we have 2 official languages that everyone's afforded, and the fact that the Conservative Party is demanding that a member
This is
only
just
use
the
one
stupidest
language to me is
fucking
just
argument, like,
unacceptable, and it needs to be
When there are
noted
bombs being dropped,
that should
and
never
there's
happen
children that are
at
dying and
committee. It should
getting
never
hurt,
happen,
like,
in the House of
and like you
Commons,
guys
and
are
it's
fucking having
it's just
an
something that goes
argument
against
over
our very
the fucking
values
language.
as
Like,
Canadians.
it's
Thank
just
you.
so
Thank
sad.
you, Mr. Kodo. I think I highlighted that when I responded earlier on, that it is a valid point of order, and the minister can answer in whatever language she chooses. Mr. Newmarvin, is this something new, or are we
It
going
is.
over
It
the
is.
same
It is
thing?
something new on related matter. It is one thing, as Mr. Koto has pointed out, which I think is reprehensible, for anyone to demand or suggest that one language be used.
But that's what.
You're already clipping your demand. That's great. Can I, if I might finish
Ask
what I was going to say?
Debate, please continue, Mr. Newmarvin.
What I find particularly reprehensible is the question as to why somebody has chosen to use a particular language. It's one thing to make the demand. It's another thing to ask the question why a minister chose to use a particular language. I mean, I think this
That's what
speaks
I've
to
been
something
wondering as
very
well,
dangerous
actually.
and very irresponsible on the part of the Conservatives. And
It is.
I think
It's
it would
childish.
be valuable and important for Ms. Thomas to retract that question or to retract that assertion, because I think it is in the interest of all of us in this room that we not have to play silly games
Yeah.
around the use of
Yeah,
our
but that's
official
what's
languages.
happening, sir.
All right, to get back to the
Like,
Peter.
checking the reality, those like little petty games are already
Madam
happening.
Chair, just for Mrs. Thomas's education, having been brought up in an English environment and having learned French in school, there are numerous times when you have a vocabulary in one particular language that allows you to speak more easily in that language.
Yeah.
And that is the principle of official bilingualism. For the Conservatives to put
So why are
in
you
question
taking
official
away
bilingualism
anything
is
that is
absolutely
related to
reprehensible.
my health? And I can't
just
get it in
can't
English
believe how
anymore.
radical and extreme this party has become since the member from Carleton took over.
Thank you. I am going to now suggest that I do not want
I
to
don't get those
entertain
in service in
any
English
further
anymore.
points of
So
order on this
your
issue.
argument's invalid.
I have ruled as a chair that the member,
Is that
Mrs.
a new
Thomas, has to
chair?
question the floor. She could question the minister, and the minister can answer in whatever language she chooses. So let's not carry on with this for too much longer. Thank you, Mrs. Thomas. your
I like
question,
her. What happened to the black dude?
We're back in school, so we're going to ask some students how they're feeling this fall semester and give out some
know.
coffee courtesy of Chegg.
And it's interesting because, like, I was thinking about it. I'm like, there was another lady who was also chair when the Andrew couldn't do it. I think that's his name. The guy that got fired. But there was like this short fat blonde chick that used to fill in for him if he like was sick or whatever. Which obviously that's reasonable. But on top of the fact that we should also have like fucking politicians that are on call 24/7, just saying. Like, and working on weekends because your job is like 24/7, so whatever. But yeah, no, it's apparently it's this this cute little old lady now.
33,000 people have signed this petition, and it is all kinds of people from across Quebec. We have students primarily, we have parents, we have people that work in the post-secondary education sector who are scared for their jobs if we see a decrease in enrollment. We have all kinds of actors who have united to take a stance against this by adding their name to what has become a very long list of signatures.
If I may, we have a French student from Polytechnique who came this morning. She did the role in support to the English students in the English institution. So that speaks a lot to me when we see so many French students in support. So this is not only the battle of the English community, this is like the battle of every student. And Catherine, she's a francophone. She's the head of l'Union étudiante du Québec. She ran 94 students from all over French University and Bishop.
Before this interview, Marwa told us that this petition is one of the biggest petitions with the most signatures in the past few years. So that is really impressive in our opinion. We didn't think it was so out of pocket, odd for such a petition to get that many signatures. We really hope it has a great impact at the National Assembly. We want to make sure that people recognize and they understand that it is really important for all students. So we really hope it has a great impact in the National Assembly. We hope so. We don't know for sure, but we hope so.
Regardless of what happens in the question period later today and the result of this petition, I think it sends a tremendous message that we have students from English universities, French universities. You know, we drove 3 hours to be here today because it means a significant amount to us that this petition has collected so many signatures and that Amani Rizki is presenting it on behalf of the students who will be deeply touched by this. So at the end of the day, to answer what I think it will achieve, it will send a message because regardless of what outcome comes today, the fact that 33,000 individuals have put their name on this petition and that students have driven hours for this conversation sends a message that this will not be ignored regardless of today's outcome, and we will continue fighting for the right to accessible and affordable education.
There's a reason why there's a day that your strike ends. Because it will go back to the big pot of fucking...
La session de base, c'est pour petit contrôle de loyer.
60 years later, and they're still fucking talking about this shit. Like,
on n'enlève rien aux locataires. Ce qu'on vient faire, c'est que on a un paquet de petits propriétaires au Québec là, qui ont des
interesting.
La session de base, c'est pour petit contrôle de loyer.
Nous changeons de thème, le thème 5, le bloc 5.
On n'enlève rien aux locataires. Ce qu'on vient faire, c'est que on a un paquet de petits propriétaires au Québec là, qui ont des triplex, des duplex, qui veulent... Je pense que c'est très raisonnable que quelqu'un qui a un duplex veuille choisir qui va habiter au-dessus de sa tête, puis ne veuille pas qu'un locataire qui quitte vende son bail à quelqu'un d'autre ou cède son bail sans avoir un mot à dire, sans pouvoir dire hey, qui va habiter au-dessus de ma tête. Alors, c'est ça qu'on vient corriger. Je ne suis pas en train de m'attaquer et de vouloir nuire à qui que ce soit. J'ai juste corrigé une anomalie qui existait dans la loi. Alors, on vient corriger cet élément-là et on n'enlève rien aux locataires.
On se comprend que les duplex ne représentent pas la majorité des bails, c'est surtout les appartements. Et également que c'est pour des périodes écourtées. Quand on fait une cessation de bail, c'est pour une période de temps qui reste dans le bail d'une année. Donc, c'est pas qu'on est pris avec cette personne, qu'on est pris avec ce locataire à long terme. Et c'est pas parce que on ne fait pas confiance à la personne qui a signé le bail original que la personne à laquelle ils vont faire le transfert ne sera pas respectueux des lieux de la même façon. Donc, c'est un petit peu de la discrimination, ce que je trouve votre explication, dans le sens que il y a certaines personnes qu'on veut qui habitent au-dessus de nous, puis certaines personnes qu'on ne veut pas qui habitent au-dessus de nous, mais on ne fait pas la distinction à savoir lequel ça se ferait.
Là, personnellement, je ne fais pas reposer le règlement de la crise du logement sur cette mesure-là. Je viens simplement, dans ce projet de loi-ci, corriger une anomalie. C'est pas ça qui va régler la crise du logement. Il faudrait arrêter de faire reposer la crise du logement sur les sessions de bail, puis sur les propriétaires de duplex et de triplex qui souhaitent décider ce qui va se passer en haut de leur tête. C'est juste ça que je dis, ou que je m'évertue à dire, ou que j'essaye de dire depuis plusieurs semaines et mois, et le discours s'en va dans l'autre sens. Ceci dit, je pense que ça, c'est clair, qu'il n'y a personne qui peut m'accuser de pas être raisonnable dans ce raisonnement.
That their plot is paid for, like, and these people are fucking stuck in condos that they can't fucking get rid of. Like, they end up tearing them down.
Hi, I'm Steven Sidkowski. I'm the Chief Investment Officer, and I'm the co-founder for Market Mastery Group. And we're an organization that's in the business of helping folks like you navigate the financial markets. I've lectured now to more than 1 million people. I've shared this stage with folks like Kevin O'Leary and Richard Branson, Mark Cuban, Robert Herjavec, Barbara Corcoran, Tony Robbins. Why is it that they ask me to come out and present with them? And the reason is, number one, they know that I know my stuff. Number two, I'm a practitioner of what I teach. And number three, I have a way of being able to take really complicated subjects like financial markets, which can be very intimidating, and
Quebecers are intelligent. They know that $5 million would not solve all the problems of Quebec. But they see the symbol, and they see the shocking symbol of a government that has completely lost track of its values, of what's important for Quebecers. Quebecers expect their government to help them with the housing crisis, with the cost of living crisis, with the climate crisis. They don't expect the government to give $7 million to a multi-million hockey club. I mean, it's the arguments of the government are pathetic. It is impossible in the context to justify such a decision. And it's putting oil on the fire of the negotiations with the public sector workers. Imagine how insulted they feel. And they are, a number of them are wearing LA Kings jerseys this morning on their picket lines. Because it's, the symbol is shocking. And I would even...
Did you hear about the football team they bought? They bought a football team, Quebec. They fucking, what did he, the Jersey team? Oh, for fuck's sake. No, but like when there's people that are fucking homeless and starving, and there's like fucking like something ridiculous, like 3 million people are getting from food banks. It's really not time to be buying. And like a bunch of people were like, "Is this really like where our money should be going? Like a sports team?" And they're like, "Yep." Like you the fucking like the balls though, like the nerve.
It is impossible in the context to justify such a decision, and it's putting oil on the fire of the negotiations with the public sector workers. Imagine how insulted they feel, and they are a number of them are wearing LA Kings jerseys this morning on their picket lines because it's the symbol is shocking. And I would even like to say, if you had asked me to invent a fictitious symbol or example of the disconnection of the government, I would never have been able to invent such a clear example.
But do you not think that it's realistically, is it not too late for the government at this point?
I don't know the specifics of the contract, but it's a decision that erodes the confidence of the public in the government and in our institutions. Imagine if you're someone who is going to a food bank, and the amount of food you receive in your basket is going down because the food bank doesn't have enough money to buy stuff. And then you turn on the TV and you see Mr. Girard saying, "Oh, we had $7 million just lying around for the LA Kings to do 2 preseason games." Imagine how you feel. I am hurt by that decision.
$1 million laying
But
around.
I have a good salary. I don't struggle to do the grocery every day. Imagine if you're someone struggling. Imagine the insult.
Yeah.
Such decisions are doing a lot of damage to our democracy. Quebecers love hockey. Quebecers are in love with their national sport. Personally, I do love a lot hockey, but they love something else even more, which is to have a society where people can eat if they work full time, a society where the people working for us in our schools and our hospitals have good working conditions and can give good services to the population. The fact that François Legault seems to think that the love of hockey is superior to the love of those other things is a testament to the respect he gives to Quebecers.
That's true. That's very true.
This is a farm. No, really, this is a farm. So is this, and this. Inside these containers, hundreds of pounds of leafy green goodness are being grown every week, all year. Rain, snow, or shine. Where are all these farms going? Everywhere. At Freight Farms, we're on a mission to move farms, not food. Because flying...
We are strongly believers that it has to go with the a better work organizations on the field. I mean, we have to find ways to convince people in both sectors.
I'm Brendan Kelly from the Montreal Gazette. We're here at McLean's Pub. We're going to talk to Habs fans about a deal announced today by the Montreal Canadiens. They've got a new corporate sponsor, Air Canada. Air Canada will have their logo on their white away jerseys. This comes just a bit over a year since they announced RBC would be the sponsor on their dark home jerseys, an announcement that caused an enormous amount of controversy at the time. We'll talk to Habs fans and see what they think. What the fuck?
Look, I know a lot of sports have the advertisements on the jerseys. I get it. It's a source of income for them. But at the end of the day, if I'm watching hockey, I just prefer not to see the ads on. A little bit distracting. It's not what I want to be thinking about, especially when I'm watching the Habs play.
Air Canada, Canadien. I think both the hockey and the airplane company are major institutions here, so it doesn't surprise me.
I'm okay with putting logos on jerseys simply because it's bringing more money to the club. If they have a small sponsor logo, that's fine. In fact, I'm okay with more.
I mean, and it's all. Oh, you would even do more than that.
Yeah, like the legs. Yeah, all that stuff. I mean, the helmets.
Some people are like, well, it's the Canadien. It's like an iconic jersey. You can't mess with it.
I think it's part of the sponsorship game. It's always been a part of sports, and so I don't see it as anything harmful to Canadians.
No, I like the logo. I like the Air Canada symbol. Kind of adds to the patriotism of being a Canadian. And I think it looks nice on the Canadian jersey. If you're a fan of the product, you're going to be a fan of the product, regardless of how many times you see it or not. I also don't think it's going to sway you into the product if you're not. If you prefer WestJet, I don't think that you're choosing Air Canada just because the logo's on the jersey.
No, like for example, in like the Premier League, they have all kinds of sponsorship in soccer, but they have a tradition of that. We don't have a tradition of this in hockey.
That's true. And I guess when you look at the Premier League and stuff, I'm not a big soccer guy, to be honest. That's why I watch hockey. I think it's a lot more interesting. But I do think that, with the Premier League, the advertisements are everywhere. It takes up the jersey. And I feel like a classic Habs jersey shouldn't be something that's messed with.
Ben Franklin, he did more than just fly a kite. He invented bifocal glasses, Franklin's stove, and of course the lightning rod. But what you might not know is that he also invented the flexible catheter.
Ew.
That we won't talk about today.
No.
Catheters.
No.
Yeah, it's sort of a touchy topic.
No shit.
When you think about where these
going in your
catheters
keyhole?
go into bodily orifices that were not
unpleasant.
really designed to accept them. Bladder stones. They're very troublesome. If you have a stone in your bladder, you can block your urethra. That causes urinary retention, and that causes indescribable pain.
Yes.
Well, Ben's brother had such indescribable pain. He had a bladder stone and he had to routinely catheterize himself.
What?
But in those days, catheters were straight metal tubes. You can imagine what that was like to shove that in. And Ben thought that he could come up with a better solution. Well, the history of catheters is actually very interesting. The early Egyptians already knew that you could use a tube. They used the bamboo or...
Are you ready to discover the secret to affordable premium smokes? Tired of spending an arm and a leg for government?
There are people who are not getting their surgeries right now. There are people who are not getting their follow-up appointments. There are people who are not getting the services that they need. And was it a year ago where our party asked the government not to get to this exact space? We told them, please start this process seriously. Please negotiate seriously with the unions so that we don't get to this situation. The last thing anybody wants is to see surgeries delayed. The last thing anybody wants is to see kids who are not in school. This should have been addressed a long time ago.
Have you ever seen a strike of this magnitude? I mean, 500,000 workers, more than that?
Not since I've been in government. And the last, from what I recall and from what I've read, there hasn't been a strike movement this large since, 40 years in Quebec. But it goes to show that that our public services are already under immense stress, that they need additional resources, that they need a reorganization, that they need to be able to be attractive so that they don't keep decreasing. Look at just the last 5 years. Look at the number, the wait times in our emergency rooms. Look at the amount of people who are missing from our healthcare network. Look at the amount of teachers who choose other professions. It's not something that we can keep on going in that direction for a long time. And that's what a lot of the public service people who are protesting outside here today and in front of schools and hospitals across the province are telling us.
The federal government has to take the responsibilities. They decide to accept a lot.
The liberal government doesn't have a leader.
They can say, well, we don't have money for that. We don't have money for them. We don't have money for Quebecers who pay to accommodate them, to feed them. It's not an option. When you decide something, you have to assume.
And so you're saying they're in French, you said it was an insult, what he said.
Well, the response of the federal minister of immigration is unacceptable. This reaction is absurd. Quebecers are paying for Ottawa's lack of responsibility right now, and this has to end.
Is it hopeless that Quebec will ever? I remember Quebec is still asking for money for compensation from the ice storm of '98, and that money never came in. Do you think this money will ever show up?
I think we will succeed. I'm confident.
Are you talking to them? Or
yes, of course. We are talking to them. It's my job.
Could have fooled me.
I'm assuming my choices. I've done this because I thought it's the right step in the process to bring a team back in Quebec City. It's a step. There will be other steps. For example, if we add the World Juniors, the subsidies that would be required that were given in Halifax or Edmonton are larger than 5 to 7 million, just like the subsidies for other sports events are larger than 5 million. So I understand the criticism as long as the criticism are directed to me, because I'm responsible for this. It's my initiative. I am the one that think that before getting an NHL team, we need to stage some major league event to remind the hockey world that we have a NHL infrastructure in Quebec City, that we have fans, that we have a culture, that we have history, and we're going to have a good product. These games are going to be NHL games. So the
Wouldn't it be easier to cancel the decision and say we made a mistake and cancel?
But why cancel? We haven't had the event. We're going to need to judge this event once it has been held. Well,
because of the reaction. You say yourself there was a lot of
okay,
negative
but
reaction.
I'm assuming my decision. Okay, I've been in this position for 5 years. If I had canceled all the decision that people did not like, I have a difficult mandate. Does anybody here think that bringing the Nordics back is an easy task?
You're a fucking asshole.
The odds that the Nordics come back, okay, is probably somewhere around 10%. Okay, so everything that I do is to make sure that the real possibility of that one day the Nordics come back and that there's an NHL team in this building that was paid by the Quebecers is real. So it's a step. We'll evaluate that step once the event has taken place. And if it's a success, we'll repeat with another team at a better cost.
Eric Girard!
This incense waterfall has 75 million views in the last week alone. It's insanely.
You're the first for the first time, and in the previous election campaign in 2022, you were 3. So, I mean, how does it feel?
Pretty good, actually.
Is there? It's always good to start, you know, at the low level and then climb the ladder.
Done for that.
What?
We start very low, but we're aiming high.
What are the risks that will stop before 2020?
Does it have to stop?
Thanks.
Let's keep it this way. If it ain't broke, we'll fix it.
So you think you're doing the
Yeah,
right
but
thing?
that's your kind of
Pretty much.
go-to fucking
But
tactic.
we don't have any proof that we're going to win the next election. But we have a demonstration that we are doing the right thing now, and that's good for us. We're a small team. We have a strong belief toward the future of Quebec, and we are doing everything with our heart, conviction, and we believe that we are here for the good reason, because we believe in the Quebec independence. We believe in the Quebecers, and this is like this is good news for us, but it won't stop us of doing what we have to do. We don't keep on looking the surveys.
They used in the article the expression snowball for Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon. Like a snowball can fade away with the sun.
We'll see. Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon is used to be underestimated, to be the underdog. Watch him; he's good. He represents the future of politics in Quebec. I really believe that, and it's the future is about Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon more than François Legault.
We haven't read the contract, and we hope there are no penalty clauses, but this is a bad decision, and the contract should be rescinded if at all possible, because it's not a good use of public funds. And the long press conference by Minister Girard today was giving us new reasons to exactly say the same thing. It's a bad decision. Mr. Girard said basically today that he had no idea what was the terms of the contracts signed for other NHL games in other cities, non-NHL cities. Well, if this was a serious investment, this should have been studied before. He mentioned today that there are 10% chances that the Nordiques might come back to Quebec. If this is the rationale behind the contract, where does this number come from? Is it a number that was thrown away to journalists today? We don't know about this. And this is another example of, you know, how easy it is for millionaires and billionaires to access public funds, whereas it is very difficult for food banks, for community groups to access the same funds. So this is not a petty case. This is not just 5 to 7 million. This is really an illustration of the way it's not the same thing, whereas you have a lot of money or whereas you're vulnerable person. This is not acceptable.
It's gonna fucking come in handy when you're out of the job. Guess what? It doesn't.
Are you saying that Mr. Girard's decision to sign this contract could actually harm Quebec City's chances of getting the Nordiques?
Well, you know what? This morning when I heard that Mr. Girard was coming in front of you, I was hopeful because I was thinking that Mr. Girard would come and rectify the situation, and not only he didn't rectify it, but he proved that he didn't have a clue of why the Quebecers were unanimous against that decision.
Yeah.
He responded to a question if he had regrets in that negotiation, and he said that his regret was he should have paid between $2 and $5 million. And the fact is that there's not a single dollar of the citizens should have been invested in that event. That's the problem here.
Yeah. His argument, well, one of his arguments was that, taxpayers already paid for the Videotron Center to be built. It needs to be filled again. This will help that happen. What do you say to that?
Well, you know what? He talked, Miss Sonia Labelle said a few days ago, she talked about amalgam. I'm sorry about not saying in English. But what we heard today with Mr. Girard, which he made a lot of those, saying about the World Championship hockey, the World Championship for women also, which are big events, which put this city on the map. Talk about the Pee Wee tournament, but generates about $14 million with an investment of $250K. These are big events that brings people here in Quebec, but I didn't hear not a single figure by the minister about what will be the money coming in from the outside in Quebec City. I didn't hear a figure. That's a problem.
You were telling us that when you did such preseason games, exhibition games, the cities that you visited, or the public, the taxpayers were not paying for those fees. Can you tell us about that? How you covered your own hotel bills and all that. The team paid for everything. Yeah.
Well, to my knowledge, and I talked to the people, the general manager that I had in the past. I talked about Phil Esposito, and I said, Phil, because we went to Vienna, in Austria 1 year, and for a week with the Buffalo Sabres, and I asked him, I said, he goes, they contacted me and they wanted me to go there, private company. They said, you know what, why don't you guys come down here? We want to bring some NHL games, and he said, that's fine, and he paid his own way. He paid the way. The Tampa Bay paid their own way there, and the only thing he asked, of course, when you're a businessman, you don't want to lose money in a venture like that. So he said, you know what I'm asking is that we split the money from the people paying for the game, and that's what he did. Exactly, he split the box office, and that's how he got he got his money back, or he made a little bit of money, but none of that money came from the public.
Taxpayers should not be paying to put 3 hockey teams up in fancy Quebec City hotels.
Not in the business where you have billionaires. You don't do that. You don't do that. I mean, it's the responsibility of the NHL clubs to go around and to present, because it's a part of the education also. It's like the Montreal Canadiens. It's their responsibility to go around the province of Quebec, to teach kids, to show kids, the example. It's a business, and they want to sell some shirts too, apparel. So it's a part of the business, but it shouldn't be the citizens who pay $1. $1 is too many.
What are you asking Mr. Girard to do today?
Well, you want to.
Oh, you can go.
Well, you want to. The motion.
Yeah, we will have a motion this Wednesday. So we will give them another chance. So I think there is no more solidarity inside this caucus. That's why he came today to say that he's okay to use the public money. But since last week, we saw so many ministers and MNAs that saying to the public, it's bad time, it's not the right thing to do. So we will ask all the MNAs, including the CAC's MNAs, to say no to Mr. Girard and to resign and to use this public money for something else. We have so many things to do with this 8 million.
Consciously crafted organic yogurt, Olympic Organic, where a little care makes a lot of good.
Following the suicide death of a 12-year-old BC boy after he fell victim to online sextortion, the National Tip Line for Online Child Sexual Abuse and Exploitation says the crime is a huge problem in Canada.
Oystergate? The fucking Oystergate.
Welcome to another edition of the Porter Booth Podcast for the Montreal Gazette here at the Stone Bay. I'm Aaron Rand, along with Bill Brownstein of the Montreal Gazette, and our guest today, Dominique Olivier. I don't think I have to tell you who Dominique Olivier is. She's been in the news now for the past couple of weeks.
Never heard of her.
And we're doing this today, Dominique. First of all, thank you for being here. We're doing this because my sense is you want a chance to explain what has gone on. I read the interview you did in La Presse suggesting that you really haven't had the opportunity to explain what happened. So let me go back to the beginning, if we can call it that. A couple of weeks ago, scandal breaks out over the time that you were head of the Office of Public Consultation in Montreal. $350 some odd oyster dinner, travel to different parts of the world. And the next thing you know, you resign. So let's start with that. I know you're saying you've done nothing wrong. We don't know all the facts. Then why resign?
Because they all
I resigned because,
gay.
as I said on my resignation speech, because to do the job of the president of the executive committee of the city of Montreal, when you're in charge of finances, when you're in charge of human resources, when you're in charge of government,
I'm sorry, they're all driving like they all own multiple
you have
cars
to
that are
have
like
a
fucking
certain
luxury
serenity
vehicles
to
off
do the
the
job.
fucking
People
lot,
have
like-
to have some confidence in you.
Their wife
And
fucking
that's a
crashed
bit
the car
what,
and they
what I
fucking buy her a
sensed
new one,
is that
like-
3 weeks ago, I was one of the most respected person in Montreal.
Oh,
And
wow.
suddenly I was getting hate mail. I was getting racist comments. I
And
was,
you're
I
doing
was
this,
getting
lady.
people that
Sorry.
were asking me to leave without even being able to say exactly what was wrong. Everybody talked about that oyster dinner. I don't know if people really know this, that it was in 2016.
What?
Happened once. And, they did like a big
Shut the front
magma
door.
with all the different facts and put
That
it all
happened
out
in
there for people
2016.
to understand or not understand it. I don't know.
So you took this as a vendetta on a certain level because basically you were attacked for many reasons. But one of the things that people don't understand is what was the Office of Public Consultation doing in places like Mozambique? And I'd like you to explain that because I still get asked that. I mean, this is a Montreal, based office, and what's going on with the travel and all the rest?
Okay. The travel is actually what you have to understand. The first thing is that a lot of people said that it started with me coming to the office, which is totally not true. And I have all the documentation that I put at the Commission on Finance last week to explain that. They started actually in 2003 with the mayor, the then mayor, Mr. Tremblay, asking the office to join 3 different networks. One of them was the OIDP, which we were in Mozambique for. The other one was AIP2, which is the Association of International Public Participation. And the third one was the Metropolis, saying that we could share the experiments and the expertise that we have in Montreal within those 3 networks. So people were going every year to those places. When I came in, Mayor Coder at that point had asked to be the president for 1 year of the OIDP. And that's the letter that I put forward saying, we would love to have the presidency because it's the 375th birthday of Montreal. And we have one expertise that's extraordinary, and it's the OCPM. And they're already active in your network. So we would like to have the presidency. So we went to have the the passation of the presidency from Mozambique, who had
For
it that
Denis
year,
Coderre.
Yeah, but
for Denis Coderre, and us to get it for the next year.
and yet it was Denis Coderre who just last week took
I
Constantine
guess-
for doing this. I
Bill,
don't get
Bill,
that.
I guess that he forgot, but I still have the letter. If you want to see it, I brought it today because people don't believe me when I said that, and we found the letter back saying that Denis Coderre signed and sent to the people saying we will be honored to have the presidency of that. And he's saying the plus value, the added value of us having the presidency is that we're going to be able to share that expertise with all of North America.
Okay, I
And
know
yet he's the
you
one
have
who said
said,
go to Mozambique for safaris, which you took.
Exactly.
you have said in an interview that I read as well, that really the problem here is more with the administration of the, or at least with the administration of the city's finance department or the auditor general, whatever that job would be, in terms of administration. Now, after you resigned, it came out a few days later that back in 2017, that office let you know when you submitted an expense report that there were some inconsistencies there. You said you answered that letter, nothing ever happened. What was that?
Well, that's again something that I find interesting because I explained all of that to the journalists that came and saw me. And nobody asked, how come they knew there was a 2017 report? Because I told them. I said the only time that we had a red flag was in 2017 when the Auditor General, and it's really a red flag because she approved all our expenses, but she says some expenses might seem, the exact sentence is surprenant. You know, I don't know, how do you say that in English? Surprising. She says, so it would be nice if you had a policy that would explain it better. But it's a recommendation. It's not saying, no, this doesn't work. And the second thing that she said in that report is that in terms of governance, it doesn't seem healthy to her that all that power is into the hand of one person, but that's the way the law is written.
But you were that person.
And I was that person, but she wasn't talking about my expenses. She was talking in general. She says, you have a treasurer, which is the treasurer of the city. So the treasurer of the city should meet with you more regularly, should maybe approve some of the expenses. And what we said is that we explained to her what the law said, basically the charter of the city of Montreal that defines the OCPM and how it works. And we said, we have to be able to maintain that independency, because one of the things that we have to remember is that when Mayor Bourque was there, he totally trashed the Department of Public Participation, saying it wasn't necessary. So when they did one city, one island, if you remember, one of the conditions was that the civil society put was that we had a mechanism that was independent of political influences so that it could do.
So I'm sorry, I want to just touch on that. So you said the idea of, you want to maintain that independence. You felt that was important. Yet at the same time, nothing changed from that time to now, right?
Nothing changed. And one of the things we said we wanted to maintain that independence, but we said we agreed that we could have a more robust way of controlling expenses. But that was on the hand of the city. So when the Auditor General sends us this report and we send her the answer, there's two parts in there. And at that point, I remember when I came in office, and I'm very sorry if you're listening, Yves Courchette, which was the treasurer at that time, I said, oh, it's nice to meet you. I've never met you in 7 years that I was in my...
That's what I was going to bring up. You were there 7 years, 2014.
There 7 years and 2 months, yeah.
2000 till 2021. Now, you have mentioned in the past, I hadn't heard this reason, that you ran a surplus for 7 years while you were there.
No, not for 7 years. 3 times in the 7 years that I was there, we sent back a surplus to the city. Because that's the way it works. We're not supposed to have money to just play with. We're supposed to have money so we can do our consultation and we can do the different mandates that we have. And if we have too much, we send it back. 1 year we sent back $200,000.
Wow.
Another year we sent back 1,700 and something. But
perception is a big part of what you're now living through, right? People look at this, they're judging you, and I know that's something that bothers you because you said you did nothing wrong. But then people look at the fact that First of all, the OCPM has offices in Cour Montreal. That's $270,000 in rent a year.
It was already there when I came
Okay,
in.
70,000. I forgot what the total was. Eating out at Chez Alexandre on a regular basis.
That
as well.
wasn't me. That wasn't me. And I never authorized stuff like that. You know, people said, oh, they eat. What they did is that they took the current administration and they took my 7 years, mixed it together, and said, this is what the head of the OCPM are doing. Yes, of course, I won't lie. I did go to maybe once a year to different tables that looked more expensive. For example, I went to the Europea, which people are talking about, or to Damas. But it was always with international partners that came to Montreal for a reason or another. And the same way when we go there, they take us out. When they come here, we take them out. But even if we look at that, for example, I will have a bill at the Europea, I have a bill of $81. I mean, we weren't drinking wine and sipping champagne and eating oysters.
So you felt that was unfair?
That is very unfair.
But more to the point, now you're saying, well, you were being thrown under the bus, but your successor, Madame Beaulieu, she's the one who, like in her brief period there, she's been running up bills at Alexandre, getting headphones, buying color TVs, giving tickets to opera.
We were sitting on the same chairs for 20 years
and all the rest.
Yeah.
But throwing you under the bus at the same time.
Yes, exactly. So how does that happen?
I have no idea. You go ask her. Personally, I think that everybody's trying to kind of save face or whatever, or try to.
So she's blaming you for her lifestyle.
She says she took over. When she took over, it was a mess.
Yeah,
that's what she says. But again, I will ask the question: if you look at the way we ran the OCPM, we had the same budget. She has a higher budget than ours. You know, only once in the 7 years that I was there, we got $2-3 million. We usually went around $1.7-1.8 million and sending surplus back. Once we had 10 consultation on the same year, and we had big things, so we went up to 3 million. But at the same time, I mean, you can look at everything that I did, and that's what bothers me. You know, whatever happens to me, it doesn't matter really. Because I think that when you go into politics, you go into politics to achieve a goal, and I was following that goal. And my goal was to give the people of Montreal, the city, that they had been talking to me in all those consultations while I was there at the OCPM. And at this point, you know, what I find sad is that people took a credit card bill. They looked at a credit card bill for 9 years, and they decided this was what defined the work that we did.
The Corner Booth podcast is brought to you in part by the Snowden Delicatessen, where we are. 75 years in business, the hub of Montreal's greatest smoked meat, plus Carnotzel, potato latkes, and the famous Snowden Deli party sandwiches. That's the Snowden Delicatessen. So let me ask you this. People have now said, the mayor, Adrian Toulemont-Parle, just a few days ago, said she has lost confidence. She used to talk about Isabelle Beaulieu, but in essence said the same thing about you. When you decided to resign, to go back to the original question, what had been your discussions with Valerie Plante?
I had none. I offered her my resignation. At some point, I received some very threatening mail, and one that said, I hope that UPAC comes to your house and that you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. And I realized, I say, I'm going in 3 days to present a budget to people that think that UPAC should come into my house and I should be in prison for the rest of my life. For doing what? Having one oyster dinner 8 years ago in another job.
Which you've repaid, you said?
Which I've repaid, and not only repaid, I repaid in dollars of today. So that $300 and something dollar I put interest on, and I made a check before I left of $400 and something dollars.
Let me ask you something. You're no longer obviously the chair of the executive committee, but you're still involved on certain. You're a city councillor in Rosemount. Do you have other functions within the city as well?
I kept my seat at the CMM because we were in the middle. Because if you can remember, I was in charge of government relations, and we have some very big issues at this point. But I don't know what the future will hold. At this point, it was pointless, I would say, to remove me because I wasn't the problem. But in a public face, I can understand that people lost confidence in the institution.
So if people have lost confidence in the court of public opinion, as we say, some will look and say, okay, you're no longer the head, obviously, the OCPM. You haven't had that job. You gave up your seat on the executive council, but you're still involved politically. And they say they can't necessarily trust someone after what happened to even be involved politically.
I would say, you know why I stay as counselor? I mean, whatever happened at the CMM, it's not my decision to make. But as a city councilor, I've received that one letter from that woman that says, I'm a single parent. Sometimes it's difficult for me to make ends meet. Maybe I eat once a day so I can take care of my daughter. But she says, I appreciate the way you face the music. I appreciate the responsibility that you took, and I would like to say that you still have my confidence. And when I received that letter, and I'm still talking about it, and I get goosebumps, I said, that's the person I'm working for.
Cool.
So she's the one who has to take the confidence away.
I'd like to bring it to another level.
Hey, I'm not fucking.
In your role as within the office of the public, it shocked me on a certain level. The biggest consultation that the Office of Public Consultation did was with the Mount Royal, with closing off of whether or not this committee should be closed off, and overwhelmingly your commission decided that the public really recommended, and that's great. And so was the situation. Then all of a sudden, Mayor Plante announced that, well, forget that, and beginning 2027, there's going to be construction, and it will be closed off. Half of the mountain will be closed off to traffic. What was your thoughts on that? What were your thoughts on that when suddenly you're part of the city administration? And you were so involved on the other side.
I'd say two things. First of all, remember that as the OCPM, we're a neutral third party. So we're not on one side or the other one.
No, I
we
understand.
take a picture and we say, at this point, this seems to us to be the best course of action to the elected people that have to make their decision. I'd like to remind everybody, because everybody seems to have forgotten that they took an OCPM report that was 10 years before that said that they should be the two dead ends. And they implemented that. And then what people were telling me is that doesn't matter what happened 10 years ago, we have to do what's going to happen today. And now, 5 years later, we're coming back with a different decision. And people are telling me, yeah, but we said 5 years ago that we didn't want that. Yeah, but 15 years ago, people said they wanted that. So, you have to understand how the mechanism works. As far as the decision, one of the things that to me is interesting is that everybody takes the resolution. If you take that says we should maintain traffic throughout. If you take just the paragraph before, and I entice people to go and do that, the paragraph before says it could be imaginable that there would be less transit on the mountain, but the conditions would have to be there. More accessibility, more public transit, and there's a couple of things that are saying. They're saying in absence of that, we think that we should leave the traffic away. So one of the things that I argued on my side was, can you guarantee that those conditions that we wrote in that report back then will be there in 2027?
Yes, but if there were another consultation, what do you think the reaction would be from the public? Don't you think that they might again be against the closing? I'm just taking a wild guess.
They might be against the closing. They might. I think there might be more people for it because there's a lot of people that spoke up also on the other side. But one of the things you have to understand is that a public consultation is not a referendum.
Right.
No.
And I understand the part about you don't enact anything that comes from it. You recommend to the city.
Exactly.
In the wake of this, though, part of what we're hearing from people is, in the wake of, if we call it a scandal, why do we even need an Office of Public Consultation if the result?
Oh my God! Yes, I'm leaving now.
Okay, so I'll call.
Okay.
You're going straight there?
Yep.
Okay.
Damn. I love you more. Yay! Fucking Dom's in a fucking mood. fucking doing the old man thing. Fucking hate when he does that. He's just fucking super slow for literally no reason. Like if John wants to fucking close early. Trying to get fucking police to do their fucking shit fucking wrong.